those folks that don't know, this is Lauren Silberman. She's been in the cannabis industry for longer than I have. Officially, probably.
21.
Officially.
Yeah. So she's worked in a lot of different environments in government and retail, in an educational setting. She is the organizer for the Coastal Cannabis Coalition, which is a political organization in Half Moon Bay along the coast that worked on the GG measure down there this past election, and going to be working on some other things coming up this year we're excited about. Trying to get them to expand more to San Mateo County and help in Pacifica and get them going that way, but we'll get there. And she has generously agreed to do a series for us of educational classes, beginning with tonight, How Does Cannabis Work? So I will turn it over to Lauren. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Joe. It's an honor to be here, and really exciting to be in the first official licensed dispensary in the county on the coast. And so, and Joe's also generously hosted our coalition meetings recently. Those are on the fourth Tuesday of the month. So you're so inclined to join us. But tonight we're going to focus on how does cannabis work. And this is the beginning of, we're going to be doing a series. So this is kind of the big overview, and then in the next couple months we're going to go deeper and deeper. But tonight I just wanted to start with the basics. How does this work? Why are we using this as medicine? Why does this make us feel, the different ways that it makes us feel? So let's just start at the beginning and dive in. So the questions we're going to kind of be answering tonight are these three. Why do we use cannabis as medicine? And then how does it function in our bodies? We're going to talk a little bit about what's the active components. You've probably heard, about THC and CBD and things like that, but what are those actually doing in our body? And then how does cannabis work in our bodies, which I just said. So let me know. We're going to have time for questions at the end, but it's a very casual setting, so if there's any questions that come up as we're going through, any topics that don't make sense as I'm explaining them, feel free to just jump in and ask for some clarification. Also, if I'm talking too fast, please let me know. That is my tendency. And so please, feel free to just jump in with whatever sparks your interest. So let's dig in. So this goes way, way, way back. We're not going to go in too much detail here, but I wanted to really start at the beginning, which is that the plant began, the history books tell us that it was first found 10,000 years ago in the Caucasus Mountains. And from there, humans actually, as we spread out in the world from those regions, we carried seeds with us. And if you can imagine hemp, we use it a lot as food. It's a very high protein food source. It's light, it's easy to carry, and it grows like a weed. I wonder where it gets that name. And so it was one of the first seeds that humans were really known to carry around the world, because it could be a quick source of food if you were staying, somewhere for a season. If you're hunting, it's a really light, high protein snack. So we started our relationship with cannabis 10,000 years ago, actually, and then from there we spread around, and we went to as the seeds spread, the ones that went more towards Africa, and land race is the term they use for a native cannabis strain or any plant strain native to that area. So the ones that went to Africa and spread out from that area are narrow leaf cultivars, which we commonly know as sativa plants. And the ones that went east to particularly the Himalayan mountains, became the broadleaf cultivars, which are the indica plants.
Where's the Caucasus?
The Caucasus are kind of, I should have put a map, actually I was thinking of putting a map up there, but they're kind of in Central Asia. So they're really in the middle of the whole Eurasia, Africa landmass of continents. So in terms of documented history, cannabis use goes back to about 5,000 years. It's documented in China and India in old pharmacopoeias or medical texts. And China was called Ma, and is recorded for, cannabis teas, all sorts of things over the years. We use it as food, we use it as fiber for textiles, for medicine, and what started 10,000 years ago in our first relationship, that we started developing doing a little bit of breeding, taking the plants that we really liked and developing it more and more into what we know it to be today, which is more medicinal. And so over that time, we're going to circle back to this word, but over that time, more cannabinoids developed, more of the medicinal compounds that we're going to be talking about today. It came to the West famously during the Victorian era. Queen Victoria had an Irish physician who traveled to India. His name was O'Shaughnessy, and he came across cannabis tinctures in India and brought it back to brought it back to Western medicine and Western civilization. And Queen Victoria was known for treating her cramps with a cannabis tincture. And so from that time, it became very popular, and you could find it in pharmacies as cannabis indica tincture. So that's what this picture is right here. Is what we could have found in any pharmacy in any town, anywhere in Europe or the United States, up until Prohibition began in 1937. And we're not going to get too much into the story of Prohibition today. Just know, what I want to touch on is that when Prohibition happened in 1937, the only people to testify against the Prohibition with the government was the American Medical Association, the AMA. And so it was in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, our medical kind of encyclopedia of medicinal therapeutic compounds, and our doctors did not want it to be outlawed because it was common medicine at the time. But it was outlawed, and by 1944 it was out of pharmacies, and we don't need to get into the whole story of reefer madness tonight.
So that's when it became under federal law?
Yes, so at that time, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was the first federal ban. From there, it was strengthened during Nixon's era with the Controlled Substances Act and that whole story. So there's a couple of different areas of that, and if you're interested, we can definitely do a talk on that at some point. Hear about the crazy stories of Harry Anslinger. I always call him Harry because but okay, that would have kind of been the end of cannabis as medicine if it wasn't for this guy. And this guy kind of looks like someone's grandfather. He's an Israeli guy, so grandfather in Hebrew is Saba. So everyone always says, oh, he's like a Saba. But he's actually been a revolutionary researcher, medical and scientific researcher, that really kind of changed the story of cannabis. So his name is Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. He's commonly called Professor Mechoulam. His friends call him Rafi. Excuse me. And he is considered the godfather of cannabis research. Why is that? Because he was the first person to publish a paper on the active chemical compounds in cannabis. He and his team have been studying the plant since the 60s. And it's a crazy story about how he got his first batch of cannabis material to study, and there is a great free documentary on YouTube that I recommend everyone check out. It's called The Scientist. If it doesn't pop up right away, you can put in The Scientist and Raphael Mechoulam or Scientist Israel, something like that. And it's a 1-hour free documentary about his whole story. It's animated a little bit. Needless to say, the first batch did not come to him through official means, and he had to figure out an official means afterwards. It's a great story. But anyway, from that first batch of actually confiscated hash that he got from a police officer, he wanted to figure out what is making us feel the way that we feel when we use cannabis. Where is that euphoria coming from? Where's that relaxation coming from? Where is that, drowsiness for some things? And so he is a chemical scientist, a chemist, and he started researching the chemistry of the plant. And since then, Israel has become the epicenter of medical research. And most people wouldn't know this number, but we have nearly 20,000 peer-reviewed studies and published articles and research out there about cannabis from a medicinal and scientific compound. And he was really the guy who started that. So we call him the Saba. But so what did he really do? So in 1964, he published the first paper on THC. So he was the first to isolate THC as the chemical compound in cannabis that is psychoactive, that gives us that psychoactive effect. And he did that with his partner, Dr. Gayoni. He is kind of the face of this research, but he is very much part of a big team of researchers, not just in Israel, but around the world, who have been pushing this forward over the years. A few years later, the same research team isolated CBD in the late 60s and published a paper on CBD, which is a different chemical compound in cannabis that we're going to get into a little bit later. And to date, the research team at the Hebrew University, particularly led by another doctor, Dr. Lumir Hanous, have identified 144 different cannabinoids in the plant. So I said we were going to come back to this word. So what is a cannabinoid? I'm going to start with the fancy official definition. Cannabinoids are the active pharmacological agents in cannabis. So pharmacological agent, what does that mean? Basically, it's the active chemical compound that interacts with our body that makes us feel different when we take it. So THC is a cannabinoid. And CBD, which you've probably heard a bit about if you've come to the dispensary before or been interested in cannabis, that's another cannabinoid. But there are also 144 of them being identified to date, and more being identified every single month. So if you came to the talk earlier this month, they were talking about 113 cannabinoids. That's what's been published, but since then, just 5-6 months ago, they've found another 20. So what's so interesting about, I call myself a cannabis nerd. I nerd out so hard. So hard, you have no idea.
I love it.
Because some of these cannabinoids, one of them looks almost exactly, from a chemical standpoint, like Tylenol. Another one looks almost exactly like OxyContin. Wow. And so when we're talking about the medical potential of this plant, it's at this point untapped. And a lot of, without getting too much into the prohibition and the stories and what it, big pharma and all, all of that stuff, there is an infinite potential in this plant of what it could do for us. And there's some people who will say that 50 years from now, instead of Tylenol on the shelves, we're going to have a cannabis-based product that will do the same thing for us. So that's what gets me excited. Let's get any questions at this point. Am I talking too fast? Okay. Let's keep going then. So the research continues. So that was in the 60s. We discovered THC and CBD, but they kept working, and they kept working, and they kept working. But it wasn't until the late 80s and the 90s when they had their next big breakthrough. And what they were looking for at that point, after 30 years of research work together, was what does THC interact with? What does it touch in our bodies that makes us feel different ways? And so it was actually Dr. Alan Howlett in 1988 who discovered receptors or groups of receptors in the brain that were responding to THC. And from there, because they were all, it's academics and researchers, they're all sharing their info and working together even around the world. So in 1992, Dr. Michellin's team discovered the chemicals in the body that mirror THC and CBD. Okay, so we talked about cannabinoids, now we're going to take it a level deeper. So what they found are endocannabinoids. And so what endo means is endogenous, which is of your body. So it's cannabinoids that your body produces. So they found that our body actually produces THC, and our body actually produces CBD, and who knows what other endocannabinoids our body is producing for us already. And from there, we'll circle back to the other one in a couple slides, but the other one is phytocannabinoids, which are ones of the plant. So they discovered endocannabinoids. And so for THC, I love this story. They named the endocannabinoid THC anandamide, and ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss. And so it was the scientists having a beautiful moment getting to name their exciting discovery and wanting to name it after what it helps you experience, which they felt was that euphoria, that bliss, so it's named anandamide. They lost their creativity when they went to CBD. It's just called 2AG. So anandamide, 2AG, but at least one of them is poetic. And then from there, that led to this discovery of an entire network of receptors in the body that communicates with these endocannabinoids, and then also with the phytocannabinoids when we supplement our system. And what that system is called is the endocannabinoid system. So, and again, endogenous of the body, cannabinoid, that active ingredient. And interestingly, this is our largest receptor system in our body. It is larger than our nervous system. It's larger than any other receptor system in our body. We have the densest concentration of any receptors of anything in our brain are endocannabinoid receptors. And so researchers have come to call it the body's supercomputer because it helps regulate nearly every bodily function, from your nervous system to your respiratory system to your digestive system, and many people feel like your entire your well-being, your sense of health, and so interestingly, you're not going to learn this in medical schools here in the United States. There is still a big disconnect between the kind of pharmacological research that's happening in universities and what's being taught to doctors, which is where organizations like Phog Center and Phog Foundation come in to fill that gap. Because even though this is the largest receptor system in our body, if you ask someone on the street, they probably couldn't tell you that, one way or the other.
So these are just receptors on cells in those.
Yeah, so we're going to
areas.
get into a bit more of where they're located in a couple slides. And we're learning more and more all the time, but actually I should probably put this diagram on the other slide. So let's take a look at it real quick. The main two we're going to be talking about, the ones we know the most about, are the CB1 and CB2 receptors. And you can see the CB1 receptors are focused more in the brain, and those are in the brain and the nervous system more. And that's what THC interacts with more. Psychoactivity, a lot of receptors in the brain. And then CB2 receptors, you'll see, is in more of our organs and are more throughout the rest of our body. And those will affect, interact with CBD more, and you get not so much psychoactivity. But we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. So let's just keep on going.
When you talk about the bliss part of it and feeling a sense of well-being, is that coming from the THC or the CBD or both? Do you have to have both?
That is a perfect question to tee up this next slide. It is coming from over 600 different chemical compounds. And so when we're talking just about the endocannabinoids, the ones in our body, we don't even know all of the ones that we're producing, but it's more than just anandamide and 2,8-D. If we're talking about phytocannabinoids, again, the ones that are from the plant, there are over 600 different compounds. We know 144 of them are cannabinoids. We know a lot about terpenes, which I'm going to get to in a minute, but then there's many others that we're still studying and figuring out what's in there. One of them is flavonoids, which I don't even know a lot about, but that's another compound in the plant that we know interacts with our systems. Chlorophyll even in the plant can interact in different ways. So we're learning more and more. That's, when I said a couple months ago it was 113 cannabinoids, today it's 144. If you follow this, it's kind of, I'd say a more exciting avenue of research to follow because there's so much new information being discovered all the time. It's not like you have to wait 50 years for like a breakthrough, But, okay, let's get in a little bit more to cannabinoids. My notes again. Okay, so like I said, there's over 600 different chemical compounds. Let's dig in a bit more to these phytocannabinoids, or the common term we just call them cannabinoids, and then endocannabinoids. So we know the most about THC and CBD, and we know a little bit more about a few others, but THC and CBD are known just as the major cannabinoids just because we know the most about them. Interestingly, they're also the ones that we can detect the most in the plant. So we've been able to study them more. And I think, I don't want to get too far off on the sidetrack, but when they outlawed THC in 1937, the average cannabinoid content, or THC potency of a plant was less than 10%. Here we are, how many years later into Prohibition, we've got plants with, upwards of 30% THC. Maybe that wouldn't have happened if they outlawed it, but anyway. And CBD is also one of the most prevalent ones, and we find it in cannabis's cousin hemp as well. So that's why you'll see a lot of hemp programs starting for CBD. You can see CBD hemp programs or products in the grocery store. But there's, like I said, 144 total. So we know a bit about these other ones as well. I'm not going to get too deep into the details unless you guys are interested in these, but CBG is, from a chemical standpoint, it's the first compound that the plant produces, and then that will turn into all the other cannabinoids. And they're starting to find CBG-rich plants and study what those therapeutic effects could be. CBC is another prevalent one. CBN is interesting. That's not naturally produced in the plant, but it's a breakdown of THC. So THC will break down into CBN, and CBN is sedative. So that's, a lot of people are exploring that for sleeping aids and sleeping options. So if you see a CBN product, that's going to be a more sedative one. So that's a bit, and then I could get really into the weeds about THCV, CBDA, all the different compounds, but that's because, like I said, I'm a cannabis nerd. And if you want to nerd out with me, let me know afterwards. But so the other one you might be hearing a lot about is terpenes. And that's kind of come into the cannabis story and discussion probably more in the last couple of years. I would say even 4 or 5 years ago, I would not know what a terpene was. But again, the research is really ever developing, our knowledge is spreading. But terpenes can be found in everything. I don't know if there's like a LaCroix or something around, there's going to be terpenes in that. And a lemon, there's terpenes. It's the aromatic oils found in spices, fruits, vegetables, anything that's lavender. And there's also more than 200 different terpenes found in cannabis as well. And the unique combination of the different terpenes give cannabis its unique smell. And there are also a variety of proven therapeutic effects of terpenes. Aromatherapy being a huge one. But then also when we're talking about ingesting those terpenes, not just smelling them, in combination with cannabinoids. Then we start to get, I'd say, exponential therapeutic effects. A great example is a company I know in Israel that's doing medical R&D ran a preclinical trial, and they tested a couple different formulations. First, they just tested just THC and just CBD and just the cannabinoids by themselves. It was for a sleep aid. Then they tested cannabinoids in combination with each other, so THC and CBD together. And the third that they tested was those cannabinoid concentrations with terpenes. And guess what was the most effective?
Terpenes.
Adding in the terpenes. So it was everything working together. One of the tests actually beat, I'm going to forget what the standard, it was like the standard.
Ambien.
Not Ambien, but it was another one of the standard sleeping pills. I think it starts with a D, and I forget it. But anyway, so that's really, so that gets us into my next slide, which is the entourage effect. So that synergistic effect of all the different cannabinoids and all the different terpenes and then all the other compounds we haven't even identified yet working together is where we get the most therapeutic benefit, the most therapeutic impact, and we call that the entourage effect, everything working in entourage together. And that's why, a product like, a pharmaceutical product like Marinol, that's an isolate. That is just THC all by itself. And you'll find patients who use Marinol, have been prescribed Marinol, and also use cannabis with the full entourage effect, are not getting the same therapeutic experience from an isolate versus something with the entourage effect. Which is why I think, Marinol has not become a major standard, product that you'll find everywhere today. And so when we're looking into the future of what's coming down the line with cannabis and also what's on the shelves today, everything is focused not so much on how much THC can I get, which has been the prohibition, outlaw era kind of mindset, but on the cannabinoid profile, or even the cannabinoid and terpene profile. And so you'll find just across the way here on the dispensary shelves, a great example is a line of tinctures that have different cannabinoid profile options. One is 50 to 50, 1 to 1. Another one is 20 to 1. And those different profiles are going to give you different therapeutic effects. So that's really what a lot of companies and researchers are working to explore and develop, is much more sophistication around that so that we can have a higher understanding of how we're using the medicine. And then future product development is also focused on those myocannabinoids that I talked about. And you can even see, go into some of the dispensaries, I don't know so much here, but in San Francisco I've seen as well, you'll see products that are Delta 8 THC.
Yeah, we just started carrying the Delta 8.
Okay, so you'll see it here too, which is different than our traditional Delta 9 THC, and it's going to have a different effect. You'll also see, I've seen THCV products a lot, THCA products, which is the acid form. We're not going to geek out too hard on that. But we're starting to see products exploring CBG. You can find something to put under your tongue that's just CBG. That's going to give you different therapeutic effects. So I can go on and on. That's really what excites me. But that gives you kind of an idea of how cannabis works, how it's interacting with our bodies, and a bit more. We touched on cannabinoid receptors, but a bit more digging down. They kind of fit together like a lock and key. And so when a cannabinoid or endocannabinoid touches that receptor, it modulates it a bit, and it causes a chemical reaction in our body that affects how we feel, how we heal ourselves, how we respond to traumas, any number of things, how we digest our food. With that, interesting to know, and some people probably might have read a blog about this or talked about this, but THC and CBD have an entourage effect. They affect how you ingest them. So if you take CBD with THC, you're not going to get as high, you're not going to get that same psychoactivity as if you just took THC alone. And that actually comes down to this lock and key and the way the cannabinoid receptors work. And that there are a couple different binding points on the receptors, and CBD connects with multiple. And when CBD is present, it will actually come in and block out the receptor that the THC can, the kind of gate that the THC would come into on that receptor. So that you'll hear a lot, CBD will help cut your high, it'll help modulate the psychoactivity. That actually comes down to a receptor level, like a cellular level, and on what's happening on your endocannabinoid system. And so we talked a little bit about location. They've actually identified 5 different types of cannabinoid receptors throughout the body, but we really only know something about 2 of them, CB1 and CB2. So we talked about that map of where they're at. CB1 receptors are more in the brain and the nervous system. They interact more with THC. CB2 receptors are in your blood cells, they're in your spleen, they're in your connective tissues, they're in a lot of your organs. They're spread out more throughout your body. That interacts more with CBD, and you don't get the same psychoactivity. And so that kind of wraps up the kind of technically, sciencey overview stuff I wanted to talk about tonight. But just kind of to sum up, we were talking about the endocannabinoid system being the body's supercomputer and affecting, nearly every system that we use in our body. And I really think that comes down to our ability to thrive. And so I call it thriving with cannabinoids, and or how it affects our human thriving behavior. And unfortunately, what we know from the chemical research, from the pharmacological research, from the areas that we've been able to do cannabis research, because I didn't touch on this, but one of the other reasons Israel is such a mecca of medical cannabis research is was for a very long time the only place we could legally do that research. It is still today illegal to research cannabis here in the United States unless you are researching the negative effects of cannabis. Those are the only types of research that the federal government will approve, and that NIDA, our National Institute of Drug Administration, will send you research material for. And so that's another reason Israel became a mecca, but sidebar. But it doesn't really fit into Western medicine, this idea of it affecting every aspect of not just our health, but our well-being. And then what is a sense of well-being? Is it being relaxed at the end of the day? Is it reducing stress? Is it modulating seizure activity? There's so many different areas that it touches, and it doesn't really fit into our conventional Western model, which is treating an illness with a pill or a surgery or ideally one option. This really affects everything from preventative care to palliative care. There are studies of from birth to death, basically, and even in you're talking about cannabis use with not even use, but cannabis and mothers and nursing moms and pregnant moms. Your endocannabinoid system gives, or mom's endocannabinoid systems give endocannabinoids to the fetus, to the child through the breast milk. So whether you are consuming cannabis or not, you are engaging your endocannabinoid system. You're producing anandamide, 2-AG, all the other ones we don't even have names for yet. And then to end of life, we're talking about it helping a lot with aging and any aspect with end of life care. There's a lot of people who are turning to cannabis instead of opiates and not wanting to be in the opiate haze and during end of life care. So it touches I see the potential and I get excited and I see it kind of affecting every aspect of our well-being. And so I'm really excited to see where it goes and what this research unlocks. And I'm nerding out on cannabinoids with anyone who'll talk to me about it. So thank you very much for listening to me nerd out tonight. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free.
Thank you, Laura. I really appreciate it.
You talked about Half Moon Bay, there's something going on down there. Does pot grow good in aquaponics?
Aquaponics. So, I think, there's a couple layers to that question. And at any level, it comes down to the farmer and, are they using good agricultural practices, GAP practices? Is it clean? Is it organic? One of the big concerns in cannabis world, particularly before it was regulated, was a lot of people were using products to help the plant grow that you would use on foliage, on plants not for human consumption, just plants in your garden. And there was a lot of dangers of that coming into human consumption. So there's, from the big picture, it comes down to the quality of the operation producing the cannabis, regardless of how. Coming down into your question on hydroponics, you absolutely can produce fabulous cannabis using hydroponics. Aquaponics, which is the system with fish. I actually have a dear friend of mine in Israel who's designed a home aquaponics system that she says works great for cannabis. So I know that there are people doing it, and from a practical standpoint, kind of drilling down another level. And I'm not a skilled grower, cultivator myself. I've worked with some over the years. The one main concern if you are growing cannabis in water is that cannabis is a remediator, that it will draw the elements out of whatever it's growing in. And if your water has heavy metals in it, it will draw the heavy metals out of the water that it's growing in into the plant. So I know that's a big concern if it is hydro or aquaponically grown. Plant is you want to ask about, how did they treat the water? Did they make sure it was treated before, if there's no heavy metals in that? Did that answer your question?
I want to add one little part on that as well.
You can clarify it a bit more.
Aqua and hydroponics versus soil, or even living soils, tend to produce less terpenes. Less of a smell. So we can see the same strain from the same mother grown in dirt and then grown in hydroponics typically, and aquaponics is going to create that same kind of effect. You lose some of the terpene content. And when we're talking about medical, we want to get as much of that terpene content as we can. That being said, you can get a higher concentration of THC occasionally in hydroponics versus dirt. But at the price of what? What are we giving up in lessening the cannabinoids and the terpenes through the hydroponic and aquaponic systems?
And we touched today on the medical and chemical research that's been being done on the plant in Israel, but they're actually doing a lot of agritech research as well. So I know there's a lot of people in Israel who are studying terpene and cannabinoid content, exactly as Joe was just saying. How does this plant grow in soil? How does it grow in water? How does it grow in aeroponics without any soil medium, in a fogged kind of system? Do we get more cannabinoids this way? Does it express CBG better this way? Does this one give us THCV? And so there's a lot of that work being done in Israel as well. Professor Meshulam that we talked about tonight, he did his initial research in the Department of Agriculture, and that continues today.
But didn't we create Israel in '47? And don't we still give them money? And I'm thinking that we're supplying the research there, even though it's
interestingly,
still,
I'm not going to get into any politics. This is just about history.
Still, because it's still under same as heroin and the
Interestingly,
whatever that is.
Guess who one of the funders of Professor Meshulam's research projects is? The National Institute of Health here in the United States.
Okay.
And there's an interesting story there. If you watch The Scientist, the documentary on YouTube, the free one that I recommended, It tells a little bit about the story, but it's kind of one of those wild stories where Professor Meshulam was on a plane with some official from the National Institute of Health who just found out that his son was diagnosed with cancer, and was like, what can we do? And he was like, well, I happen to be researching this, and wound up allocating funding that he still gets today. It's a complicated story.
I have a question.
Yes.
She's my daughter.
Yeah, hi mom.
My understanding, and I don't know if I'm right about this, but because Israel runs its research at a really high standard, I mean very high levels of controls and all of that kind of stuff, that the United States accepts findings, that the FDA in the United States accepts findings that have been researched in Israel.
That's a whole other.
So there's kind
layer.
of like, it's a way to kind of show, if we can't research it here, but they can research it there, and we accept their research, if it's done at a really high level, then we can at least benefit from, we don't have to wait.
Sure.
And it's
Until our federal government gets its head out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Although I don't know that I want it to take its head out of its ass after experiencing California putting its head in our ass.
Another whole session, regulation, prohibition. Any other questions about anything we talked about
What's that
tonight?
video called? The Scientist?
The Scientist. Yeah, so if you just go on YouTube, you Google The Scientist Israel, it will pop up. It's 1 hour, it's free, it's very cute, there's cartoons. And it tells the story of the research that was being done and Professor Meshulam.
And which one activates which?
THC, that activates your CB1 receptors more. They activate all of your receptors, but more your CB1, which are more located in your brain, and give you that psychoactivity. And then CBD interacts more with your CB2 receptors, and those are more throughout your body, in your blood cells, in your organs and connective tissues. And that one doesn't get you as the same psychoactivity.
But you always need the THC to activate the CBD, you're saying.
That's a big question, and it's a lot of what each consumer chooses for themselves. There's some people who prefer not to use THC, but the research shows that pain relief effects and a lot of effects that then working together, even a tiny amount of THC will benefit, will give you a higher pain relief. And that comes back to the entourage effect that we were talking about, where all of them working together gives you the biggest kind of therapeutic payoff.
Well, when I tell people about anything, I say it's called the entourage drug because it helps on many different diseases.
Yeah.
But you're talking about the entourage effect within
The
itself.
the entourage drug gives you an entourage effect in your body. Yeah.
But what is the best way to take it? If
That
you're
is going to
looking,
be the topic of our next conversation. Next month, we're going to be talking all about delivery methods, and not so much what the best way to take it is, but what each way will give you. How much you'll feel it, how long you'll feel it for,
and
then
what you'll feel.
exactly, and then that will give you the information to be able to make informed decisions about how you want to consume it. Do you want something that's going to last you all day? Do you want something that's going to give you fast relief? Do you want, something that's going to help you locally? You got a bruise or something. So we'll be digging into more of that next month. So.
And that will be on the 12th. And I also want to let y'all know, in addition to that, later in the month of February, I'm not sure of the date yet, but we'll email you the date, we'll be doing a vaporizing class, a dabbing class, and talking about the specific science that we touched on earlier in regards to vaporization versus combustion and what we can create and control and things like that. So it'll be a nice follow-up with more in the second part of this class.
Just real quick, I just wanted to just say to my husband, he was taking THC for sleeping at nighttime. That's all that he needed it for. I do it all the time for various pain things, but I have higher tolerance than him. And so he was doing it just to insert. So sure enough, he was getting he was like, oh wow, yeah, I feel that, I could go to sleep now. And then he didn't like the psychedelic effect. He couldn't handle it at all. For me, I could go straight to sleep. And so
I don't know how you reach
and
that
so,
sense of
well,
well-being.
so the
The
foundation referred him to try CBD instead.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did. He's been doing it probably for about a month now. He loves it. He goes to sleep. He doesn't wake up lightheaded, he doesn't wake up foggy, he doesn't have the psychedelic effect. He likes it so much better. So much better, and it's the CBD thing.
And that's what's great about having so many different active, chemical agents in here. There's choices for people. You know, some people the THC helps, just like you said. Others the CBD helps better.
I know, I love learning about how much of your body and your system is affected. And of course it's going to be different for all of us. And so the patients are kind of trying different things and see what works, because we're all such sensitive, different people.
That's what's nice about the foundation, is that they will explain to you what ratio to take, what to start with, little by little. And they'll help you. That's what they're
Also next month, sorry, just as a quick aside, on February 7th, I believe. Yeah, February 7th, Dr. Vanessa Miles will be coming to talk about cannabis and seniors.
Fantastic.
She is a MD who has worked to advocate medical recommendations, both politically and in the medicinal community. You heard Lauren talk a little bit earlier about the disconnect between our typical MD and cannabis. She's working to get past that. So she'll be here before this next class with Lauren on the 7th. So we have those 3 events coming up in February here in the foundation.
What's her name again?
Dr. Vanessa Niles.
And what age is a senior?
In my world, it's 50 and up.
Because we're 50 and up.
I was hoping, maybe you covered this before I walked in, but could you demystify a little bit about, say, like some of the CBD that you're finding at the grocery store versus the stuff that you're finding here, and like synthetic, whole plant extracted, hemp, all these words that we see.
Great question, and I touched on this a very little bit. I kind of glossed over it, but and I said, CBD by itself is found in hemp plants, which is a cousin. We're not going to get too deep into the black hole that is hemp versus cannabis, but they're essentially the same plant. But on a cannabis plant, you're going to get all the other medicinal compounds we talked about tonight. On a hemp plant, there's really very few medicinal compounds, and the primary one is CBD. So the big difference that you'll find in the CBD products at any grocery store, health food store out there now, is that they are hemp derived, and they're primarily going to be made up of THC from hemp. That doesn't have all of the different medicinal compounds we talked about in cannabis. The difference between the products you're going to get right across the way here in this dispensary is that you're going to get CBD with all of the other pharmacological compounds, and then from that you're going to get that entourage effect, which is all of them working in synergy together to give you the highest therapeutic payout. And so, not to say that the products in the CBD hemp products out there aren't giving a ton of people relief and aren't a great option for people who don't like the psychoactivity and just want CBD. But that's kind of the primary difference. And there is, you probably, if you've come here before, you've heard Joe talk about it as well, isolates versus, as Jess said, full plant compounds, full plant extracts, full plant medicine. And the difference is, an isolate is when you have taken out one of those cannabinoids, like just CBD, and taken it all the way out, so that's all you have, you just have the CBD. And you'll find it being added to cosmetic products, to water, sports drinks, to anything under the sun out there right now. Is CBD isolate is kind of the wonder drug they're adding to everything. And there is definitely some therapeutic effects from that, but it's not giving you the entourage effect of CBD working in synergy with all the other medicinal compounds. So that's why Joe and myself and many others will really push full plant medicine, full plant extracts that give you that entourage effect, because there are 600 different compounds. We don't understand even how they all work together yet. So why start messing with it?
Do you have the impression that it's more of like a marketing wash or a marketing play for some companies?
It is a big pharma, big corporate ability to still sell weed without selling weed, and to maintain their ability to finance the anti-cannabis industry until they can get a regulation on it and move us out of the way.
Yeah.
It's a horrible, the hemp industry, and the fact that the Farm Bill is being touted as a major advancement in our fight is a slap in the face and a lie just like Prop 64 was a lie in many ways. Don't get me started on preaching, but again, it's because hemp does not contain THC, which is a necessary compound, a necessary cannabinoid in any medical treatment through medical cannabis. It is necessary. They can't do it, so they're going to produce as much misinformation as they can, and they can do a lot because it is regulated as a food supplement, not a medicine, not a food product, but a supplement. So that the rules are very lax on what they can claim and what it is.
So they're taking advantage of that knowledge gap.
They are taking advantage of the fact that there is a small little world of knowledge about CBD being useful for a lot of people without getting you high like that nasty marijuana does. Okay?
Yeah.
And they're exploiting it. Our government is exploiting it, again, to try to slow this progress that we're making in multiple states and keep us where we're at.
We tend to try to oversimplify and just generalize everything.
We like buzzwords and catchwords.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
So hemp is what they make clothes out of?
Yeah, it's so if we're
All
gonna
kinds.
deep
Go
dive
ahead.
into hemp a little
Go
bit, yeah.
ahead.
So there is the botanical definition of hemp, and then there is the legal definition of hemp. They're not the same. So if we're talking botanically about the plant itself, traditionally cannabis is known as the female version of the plant, and hemp is known as the male version of the plant.
Oh.
And the hemp plant is what we make textile, food, hemp clothes, rope, hemp seed that you can buy at a snack in Costco or whatever. That's going to come from hemp, which is the male plant, and doesn't have as many of those medicinal compounds. We're talking about a legal standpoint. That's a different story. And hemp is legally any cannabis sativa plant, whether it's hemp or cannabis, that has less than 0.3% THC. So in that aspect, sometimes you can find cannabis plants, female full spectrum cannabis plants with less than that THC amount under a hemp program. But more often than not, you're going to get that kind of male seeded, industrial hemp version. Yeah, exactly. Taste it. Perfect example.
And even when we do talk about cannabis plants that are producing less than that 0.03%, such as like Charlotte's Web can produce that. Even when we're talking about that production in the plant, we're only extracting cannabinoids from the mature flower or bud, okay? And that's important in a lot of conversations and belief. It's the equivalent of an embryo versus an adult human. The flower on the plant is the culmination of bringing all of the cannabinoids and terpenes together in one place. In hemp, they're getting their cannabinoids out of the stem, the stalk, the leaves, blah, blah, blah. So there's a huge difference there.
Yeah, it's the entourage effect versus,
Yeah.
CBD isolate. Which, don't get me wrong,
There's
it's,
uses.
many uses. And actually, if I really want to geek out, until Prohibition, we grew a ton of hemp. We produced paper on it,
Yeah.
rope, for the military, had a ton of great tents. It was also feedstock for feed animals. And so it was eaten by our sheep and our goats and our cows. And many people believe it was endocannabinoids and cannabinoids was in our food chain and in our food system, was something that we ate that came to us like in our meat and in our vegetables and just in, not vegetables, vegetables don't eat food stuff. But you get what I'm saying. Yeah. Not yet, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. And there is a whole avenue of research into endocannabinoid deficiency disorder, EDD. And there's a lot of people that believe that a lot of our unexplained illnesses that have popped up since we got processed food and since, the last industrialization of the 20th century, that a lot of that comes from us not having cannabinoids in our food chain and in our food system anymore. We're not eating CBD as much, from even industrial hemp. And you can find peer-reviewed research, but some of the 20,000 we talked about earlier today is all on EDD, endocannabinoid deficiency disorder. So there's a lot of doctors that are telling me that they think we should be taking it, CBD at least, or something every day as a multivitamin. It should be you know, in our multivitamins and our smoothies, and you know, it's part of our
Nutritional.
The kids I work with, they're sick all the time, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a headache.
Yeah.
Guys, I have a headache.
yeah.
Or I don't feel good today, and it gets cold, so, because they have been exposed to these kind of things.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree.
I just have one more question.
Mhm.
What's the difference, you mentioned psychedelic,
Mm-hmm.
what's the difference between hallucinogenic and psychedelic? And
So,
can you get,
I just
Can you have
actually
hallucinations on
learned a
top?
bit. I learned a better answer to this question recently. So a hallucination is when you hallucinate something, and you are hallucinating something that is not the reality in front of you. That is not the same as psychedelic. A psychedelic substance is something that affects your the way that you think and that your brain functions, your psyche. So it alters your psyche and how you think for a temporary amount of time. It doesn't necessarily mean hallucinations. Interestingly, I also just learned the word psychotropic.
Yes.
And CBD is psychotropic in that it does affect your psyche and your brain, but it doesn't alter your processing in the way that a psychedelic thing will temporarily alter the way that you're processing information.
okay, so psychedelic is inside your brain, and hallucination is something you're seeing outside.
That your brain, I think, is tricking you, and that's where we'll have to have a talk with someone who is actually a brain scientist, you know, who can explain. But hallucination is something that your brain is producing that causes you to see something that is not there. I guess technically a hallucination is a psychedelic effect, and that it's an altered processing in your brain. But I wouldn't make a connection between a psychedelic, you know, agent and a hallucination. That's when things have gone wrong. And you should consult a doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, so cannabis is not a psychedelic drug.
THC, which is in some cannabis, which is, you know, the cannabinoid, which is one of the many things in cannabis, that is psychedelic.
Is it really?
Mm-hmm. So that does temporarily alter your psyche and how you
Perception of reality.
Right,
perception
so
of reality.
it's
That's a great way
as
to say
in
it.
not hallucinating. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who's hallucinated from cannabis.
Yeah, no.
You definitely had issues with reality, maybe.
Yeah.
But
Kind
it
of altered
was,
perception of
yeah,
reality.
yeah, it wasn't a hallucination, it was real shit.
Yeah, we had another question?
Yeah, I think you did a really awesome job of just synthesizing
Yay.
a lot of,
Another
you know,
thing.
complicated stuff down into one thing. And as you're doing it, I was thinking, like, if we're looking maybe like 5 years down the line, and let's say it's post-legalization, federal legalization, how do you look at, like, patents, for example? Some of these compounds and combinations of terpene profiles and cannabinoid profiles seem really, really threatening to large industries. Do you think?
Definitely. So that touches on kind of a third track of product development. We talked a bit about two of them today, which is what you'll find here in the dispensary, which I just call your dispensary product. And then you have over-the-counter products, which is like the CBD and stuff you'll find in the grocery stores. The third track to that of product development is pharmacological development, pharmaceuticals. And that's an entirely different process. And it takes 7 to 10 years of R&D, of research and development. You have to do preclinical trials first with anecdotal studies and case studies, then with in vivo and in vitro, which is petri dishes, and then you have to do an animal model. If you want to call it clinical, you have to have an animal model preclinical. And then you have to do 3 phases of clinical trials, phases 1, 2, 3. And then there are multiple levels of that. So phase 2A is usually like the standard, what standard pharmaceutical products are. Phase 3 is when it comes back to patients. But you don't, clinical trials is when you hit human, you're interacting with humans. What's unique about Israel is they actually allow human clinical trials with cannabis. So every human clinical trial that's been done with cannabis has happened in Israel because the Ministry of Health allowed it. That is the pathway for pharmaceutical products, which is where you get the really defendable IP, they call it, which is where you can start patenting plant-based things, because it's not something that anyone could grow in their backyard. It's something that's been hyper-developed to be predictable, repeatable, to be safe, non-toxic to humans, to have passed, 7 years of studies. And I do see long term there's going to be a push, you know, and from a legal standpoint, you know, you go anywhere else in the world, what we call medical cannabis, you cannot legally call medical cannabis because there's legality about using the word medicine. And if you're going to use the word medicine, that something is a drug, a medicine, it has to go through those 7 to 10 years of pharmaceutical R&D. It has to hit all the standards for preclinical, three rounds of clinical trials, and those are very strict international protocols for human subjects. If you're going to give a test of anything to a human, there are very, very strict standards. You have to pass it through an international research board. You know, you have to have ethics, you know, reviews and things like that. And
A novel idea.
yeah, exactly. And we have been barred from doing that research since Prohibition. So we are at a deficit in the cannabis world because where every other opiates have been developed, you know, every other aspect of a medicinal pharmacological development has been aspect, and we've been in the dark, you know, they talk out of the shadows into light, we've been stuck in the dark with research. And so we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what this plant can do. And I do think that there is going to be a push towards trying to fit this plant, this botanical medicine, into the third rail, that pharmaceutical R&D, and saying
Third
that-
rail that we
Yeah.
want to destroy and
Exactly.
keep out of
Which-
cannabis.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily,
it's a
I don't
scary
necessarily
thing.
believe, I don't want it to displace everything else.
Yeah.
I would love it to be an option because I think there's so much potential. They're finding cannabinoids that kill cancer cells, and like if we could actually do all of the directed research needed to develop a cancer-killing pill, like yes, but don't let that keep us from what we have access
Yeah.
to here, and the product diversity and the genetic diversity.
I think it's about it's a difference of a pharmacological aspect of cannabis and a lifestyle aspect of cannabis to not need the pharmacological
talking about that,
point.
that thriving with cannabis, you know.
Yeah,
human
thriving with. I love it.
behavior.
I love it, Lauren.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's about
From preventative
Preventing.
care to palliative care, A to Z.
and when pharmacological entities get involved,
very
it's
narrow
very frightening. They
Yeah.
seek and destroy and control.
Yeah.
We've spent a lot of time talking about patents in the last couple of weeks, actually, as we've gone through legalization, and the monies and the amounts of cash required to do those trademarks, patenting requirements, especially in the industry, in the environment we deal with legally as a cannabis company. It's terrifying. You know, we
Let's
could-
not visualize that blowing up. How about
Actually,
that? Right here in
this
this
is a
room.
perfect opportunity for me to plug a fantastic
Yes.
organization out of Oregon called the Open Cannabis Project. They're also a 501c3 nonprofit. They're based out of Portland. What they are working is to get this, what knowledge we have about cannabis into the public domain. So another layer to prohibition and to being in the dark, not just limiting research and what we understand chemically about the plant, is that the plant strains that we have developed, the many different cultivars or versions of the plants that we have, are not in the public domain the way the different types of tomato plants are. And so there's fear that as federal legalization hits and we can start doing federal patents on different cannabis products, there's going to be a big push to patent everything that has been developed over the last, 50, 60, 70, 100 years in prohibition that couldn't come into the legal public domain. So, should check out the Open Cannabis Project out of Portland, because they are working to get ahead of that curve and to codify this information and release it through their nonprofit into the public domain before other people can come in and patent it.
Yeah.
So they're a great organization. You can find them online. They're on Instagram. There are a lot of the different cannabis types of events you can go to.